The production budget for King Kong was approximately $207 million, making it one of the most expensive films ever produced at the time of its release, and the movie went on to earn more than $560 million worldwide at the box office, becoming a major commercial success while also receiving widespread critical acclaim for its visual effects, performances, emotional storytelling, and ambitious scale. Directed by Peter Jackson, the film stars Naomi Watts, Jack Black, and Adrien Brody. Released in December 2005, the movie serves as a large-scale reimagining of the classic King Kong story, expanding the original concept into an epic adventure that combines action, fantasy, romance, survival, horror, and tragedy. One of the most impressive aspects of the film is its ambition. Peter Jackson clearly approaches the material with enormous respect and passion, treating the story not as a simple monster adventure but as a grand cinematic experience designed to immerse audiences in an entirely different world. From the opening scenes, the movie establishes a sense of scale and atmosphere that immediately distinguishes it from many modern blockbusters. Set during the Great Depression, the story introduces Ann Darrow, a struggling actress whose life changes dramatically when she becomes involved with filmmaker Carl Denham and his ambitious expedition to a mysterious island. The early portions of the film spend considerable time developing the characters and establishing the historical setting, and while some viewers have criticized this section for its length, it ultimately provides an important emotional foundation for everything that follows. The film understands that audiences must care about the characters before they can fully appreciate the spectacle, and this investment in character development becomes one of its greatest strengths. Naomi Watts delivers an outstanding performance as Ann Darrow, bringing warmth, vulnerability, intelligence, and emotional depth to a role that could easily have been reduced to a simple damsel in distress archetype. Instead, Anne becomes one of the most important elements of the story because her humanity helps create the emotional connection that drives the entire narrative. Jack Black's portrayal of Carl Denham is equally compelling because the character represents ambition taken to dangerous extremes. Denham is charismatic, determined, creative, and endlessly driven, yet his obsession with success often blinds him to the consequences of his actions. This complexity makes him far more interesting than a traditional villain because his decisions are motivated by genuine belief in his own vision. Adrien Brody provides a quieter but effective performance as Jack Driscoll, bringing sincerity and emotional stability to the story while serving as an important contrast to Denham's reckless ambition. Once the expedition reaches Skull Island, the film transforms into something extraordinary. The island itself becomes one of the most memorable locations ever created in modern fantasy cinema. Through a combination of practical effects, digital environments, detailed production design, and remarkable visual effects work, Peter Jackson and his team create a world that feels ancient, hostile, mysterious, and alive. Every section of the island appears to contain new dangers, hidden secrets, and unimaginable creatures. The sense of discovery is one of the film's greatest achievements because audiences genuinely feel as though they are exploring an unknown place untouched by the modern world. The visual effects remain impressive even years after the film's release because they are used not simply to create spectacle but to support storytelling and atmosphere. The dinosaurs, giant insects, prehistoric predators, and other creatures all contribute to the feeling that Skull Island exists outside ordinary reality. One of the most memorable aspects of the movie is the way it presents survival as a constant struggle. The island is not merely a setting but an active threat, forcing characters to confront dangers at every turn. The action sequences are intense, creative, and often astonishing in their scale. Whether characters are escaping stampeding dinosaurs, battling giant creatures, or navigating deadly environments, the film consistently delivers excitement while maintaining narrative momentum. However, the true heart of the movie is King Kong himself. The character is brought to life through groundbreaking motion capture technology and an extraordinary performance by Andy Serkis. What makes Kong remarkable is that he never feels like a simple monster. Instead, he is portrayed as a complex and emotionally expressive creature capable of loneliness, curiosity, protectiveness, anger, and sadness. This emotional depth transforms the film from a conventional adventure into something far more powerful. Kong's relationship with Andero becomes the emotional center of the story because it is built on mutual understanding rather than fear. Their interactions contain moments of humor, tenderness, and genuine connection, allowing audiences to see Kong as a living being rather than a destructive force. This approach is essential to the film's success because the tragedy of the story depends upon viewers empathizing with Kong. Peter Jackson demonstrates remarkable skill in balancing spectacle with emotion. Even during the largest action sequences, the narrative never loses sight of its characters. The cinematography enhances this balance by presenting both the beauty and danger of Skull Island through stunning visual compositions. Vast landscapes, towering cliffs, dense jungles, and dramatic lighting all contribute to a sense of scale rarely achieved in modern filmmaking. The musical score by James Newton Howard further elevates the experience, providing emotional power, suspense, wonder, and tragedy whenever necessary. Another notable strength of the film is its exploration of themes such as ambition, exploitation, beauty, loneliness, and humanity's relationship with nature. Carl Denham's obsession with capturing something extraordinary ultimately leads to devastating consequences, creating a cautionary narrative about the dangers of prioritizing success over responsibility. The story repeatedly asks whether some things should remain untouched and whether humanity's desire to possess and control can ultimately destroy what it admires. These themes add depth to the narrative and help explain why the film remains memorable years after its release. The pacing is deliberately expansive because Peter Jackson wants audiences to fully experience every stage of the journey. While some viewers may find the running time excessive, many of the film's greatest strengths come directly from its willingness to spend time developing characters, atmosphere, relationships, and world building. Rather than rushing from one action sequence to another, the movie allows important moments to breathe, creating a stronger emotional impact when major events occur. By combining spectacular visual effects, outstanding performances, ambitious world building, memorable action sequences, emotional storytelling, and one of cinema's most iconic tragic figures, King Kong 2005 succeeds as both a technical achievement and a deeply moving adventure, establishing itself as one of the most ambitious and emotionally powerful blockbuster films of the 21st century. King Kong 2005 becomes even more captivating once the expedition fully enters the dangerous and unpredictable environment of Skull Island because the film begins expanding its sense of scale in ways that few adventure movies have ever achieved. And one of the most impressive aspects of this portion of the story is the way it transforms the island into a living character rather than a simple location. Every area of Skull Island feels ancient, hostile, mysterious, and completely disconnected from the modern world. The audience quickly realizes that survival itself has become a challenge because danger exists in nearly every direction. Peter Jackson demonstrates remarkable attention to detail throughout these sequences, creating an environment filled with towering cliffs, dense jungles, hidden valleys, ancient ruins, and creatures that seem to belong to another age. The result is a setting that feels genuinely immersive. Viewers are not simply watching characters travel through a fantasy world, they feel as though they are exploring it alongside them. This sense of discovery becomes one of the film's greatest strengths because every new location introduces fresh possibilities and unexpected threats. The visual effects continue playing a crucial role in maintaining this illusion. Considering the technological limitations of the period, the quality of the creature animation, environmental design, and digital cinematography remains impressive. The prehistoric wildlife inhabiting Skull Island helps create the impression that the island has remained isolated from the rest of the world for millions of years. Rather than presenting a single monster as the primary attraction, the film introduces an entire ecosystem of dangerous creatures, each contributing to the atmosphere of unpredictability and wonder. One of the most memorable aspects of this stage of the narrative is the constant tension. Characters are rarely given opportunities to relax because new threats emerge almost immediately after previous dangers have been overcome. This relentless pace creates a sense of urgency that keeps viewers emotionally invested. However, the film does not rely solely on action. Peter Jackson consistently balances spectacle with character development, ensuring that the audience remains connected to the people experiencing these extraordinary events. Naomi Watts continues delivering a remarkable performance as Anne Darrow because she brings emotional authenticity to situations that could easily have become overwhelmed by visual effects and action sequences. Her reactions make the dangers feel real and help ground the fantastical elements of the story. One of the most important developments during this stage is the gradual evolution of the relationship between Anne and Kong. What initially appears to be a terrifying captivity scenario slowly transforms into something far more complicated and emotionally engaging. The film takes its time exploring the dynamic between these two characters, allowing audiences to observe moments of curiosity, understanding, trust, and unexpected companionship. This relationship becomes the emotional foundation of the entire movie because it allows viewers to see Kong as more than a gigantic creature. Through Anne's perspective, the audience begins recognizing Kong's intelligence, loneliness, and emotional complexity. Andy Serkis's performance through motion capture technology remains extraordinary because he gives Kong a level of personality rarely seen in digital characters of that era. Every movement, expression, and reaction communicates emotion, helping transform Kong into a genuinely sympathetic figure. The action sequences during this portion of the film are among the most ambitious ever attempted in an adventure movie. Rather than relying on repetitive confrontations, each sequence introduces unique challenges and environments. Massive creatures, dangerous terrain, and unpredictable circumstances combine to create moments of suspense and excitement that feel distinct from one another. Peter Jackson demonstrates exceptional skill in staging these scenes because audiences can always understand the geography of the action and the stakes involved. Even the most chaotic sequences maintain a sense of clarity, allowing viewers to remain emotionally invested rather than becoming overwhelmed by spectacle. Another notable strength of the film is its willingness to embrace both beauty and terror simultaneously. Skull Island is undeniably dangerous, yet it is also presented as a place of extraordinary wonder. The cinematography frequently highlights breathtaking landscapes and moments of natural beauty, reminding audiences that the island is more than a collection of threats. This balance enhances the story because it reinforces the theme that nature is both magnificent and dangerous. The characters are constantly confronted by forces larger than themselves, creating a sense of humility that contributes to the film's emotional depth. Carl Denham remains a fascinating character because his obsession with capturing something extraordinary continues driving many of the story's events. Jack Black's performance becomes increasingly effective as the narrative progresses because he avoids portraying Denham as a simple villain. Instead, the character is presented as a man whose ambition gradually blinds him to the consequences of his actions. This complexity adds thematic depth because the film repeatedly examines the relationship between human ambition and exploitation. Denham genuinely believes in the value of what he is pursuing, yet his inability to recognize ethical boundaries creates increasingly serious consequences. Adrien Brody's Jack Driscoll also continues developing during this stage, providing a more grounded perspective that contrasts with Denham's obsession. His determination to protect others and his growing connection with Anne help maintain an emotional center within the larger spectacle. The pacing remains ambitious because Peter Jackson is committed to fully exploring the world he has created. Rather than rushing through major events, the film allows audiences to absorb the scale, atmosphere, and emotional significance of each development. While some viewers may consider the running time excessive, this deliberate approach contributes significantly to the movie's immersive quality. The audience feels as though they have genuinely traveled to Skull Island and experienced its dangers alongside the characters. The musical score continues enhancing this experience by providing emotional resonance, suspense, excitement, and tragedy whenever necessary. Every major scene feels larger because of the careful combination of music, cinematography, visual effects, and performance. Themes of loneliness, survival, ambition, exploitation, beauty, and humanity's relationship with nature continue becoming more prominent as the story unfolds. These themes prevent the film from becoming a simple monster adventure because they encourage viewers to think about the consequences of the characters' actions and the moral questions raised by their decisions. By combining extraordinary world building, groundbreaking visual effects, memorable action sequences, strong performances, emotional storytelling, and increasingly complex thematic exploration, this portion of King Kong 2005 further establishes the film as an ambitious cinematic achievement that successfully balances spectacle and heart while preparing audiences for the even more emotionally powerful developments that lie ahead. King Kong 2005 continues expanding both its emotional depth and its sense of adventure because the story gradually shifts from being a tale about exploration and survival into a much more personal and tragic narrative centered on understanding, empathy, and the consequences of human ambition. And one of the most remarkable achievements of this stage of the film is the way it develops Kong from a terrifying force of nature into one of the most emotionally compelling characters in the entire story. Many monster films focus primarily on destruction and spectacle, but Peter Jackson takes a very different approach. He invests significant time in showing Kong's personality, intelligence, vulnerability, and loneliness, allowing audiences to form an emotional connection with a creature that could easily have been portrayed as nothing more than a giant threat. This decision becomes one of the defining strengths of the movie because it transforms the narrative into something much more meaningful than a conventional adventure. Through Ann Darrow's interactions with Kong, viewers begin seeing a side of him that no one else in the story fully understands. Their relationship continues evolving in subtle but powerful ways, creating moments that are surprisingly gentle and emotional despite the extraordinary circumstances surrounding them. Naomi Watts deserves enormous credit for making these scenes work because she manages to create genuine emotional chemistry with a digital character. Her performance communicates empathy, curiosity, compassion, and understanding, helping audiences accept the unusual connection developing between the two characters. Andy Serkis's motion capture performance remains extraordinary because every movement and expression conveys emotion. Kong's reactions often reveal more about his feelings than many human characters express through dialogue. The audience begins understanding that he is not simply protecting Anne because she is different from other humans. He is responding to a rare experience of companionship in an otherwise isolated existence. This emotional foundation becomes increasingly important because it gives weight to everything that follows. At the same time, the dangers of Skull Island continue creating opportunities for some of the film's most spectacular action sequences. Peter Jackson demonstrates exceptional creativity in designing these encounters because each challenge feels distinct. Rather than relying on repetitive monster attacks, the film constantly introduces new environments, creatures, and situations that test the characters in different ways. The scale of these sequences remains astonishing. Massive creatures, impossible landscapes, and overwhelming odds combine to create a sense of adventure rarely matched in modern blockbuster filmmaking. Yet despite the enormous scale, the action never feels disconnected from the story. Every major sequence contributes to character development, emotional investment, or thematic exploration. This integration helps distinguish King Kong from many spectacle-driven films because the excitement always serves a larger narrative purpose. The visual effects continue to impress throughout this stage of the movie. Although technology has advanced significantly since 2005, the craftsmanship involved in creating Skull Island and its inhabitants remains evident. The environments feel detailed and lived in, while the creatures appear to belong to a coherent ecosystem rather than existing solely for action scenes. This attention to world building strengthens the illusion that Skull Island is a real place with its own history and natural order. The cinematography further enhances this effect by presenting the island with a sense of awe and scale. Wide shots reveal breathtaking landscapes, while closer compositions emphasize the vulnerability of human characters within this enormous and dangerous environment. Another major strength of this portion of the narrative is the continued development of Carl Denham. Jack Black's performance becomes increasingly interesting because the character's ambition begins producing consequences that are impossible to ignore. Denham remains convinced that capturing something extraordinary will justify every risk and sacrifice, yet the audience increasingly sees the damage caused by this obsession. The film does not portray him as purely evil. Instead, it presents him as someone whose desire for success gradually overrides his ability to recognize ethical boundaries. This complexity makes the character more compelling because viewers can understand his motivations even while questioning his decisions. Adrien Brody's Jack Driscoll continues providing an important emotional counterbalance. His concern for Anne and his willingness to place others before himself help reinforce the film's themes regarding compassion and responsibility. The contrast between Driscoll and Denham becomes increasingly significant because it highlights different responses to ambition, success, and human relationships. The pacing remains deliberate, allowing audiences to fully absorb the emotional and visual scope of the story. While some adventure films rush from one major event to another, King Kong takes the time to develop atmosphere, relationships, and thematic ideas. This patience contributes significantly to the movie's emotional effectiveness because viewers become genuinely invested in the characters and their experiences. The musical score continues elevating every scene through its ability to communicate wonder, danger, excitement, sadness, and emotional intimacy. Few blockbuster scores achieve such a strong connection between music and storytelling. Themes of loneliness and belonging become particularly important during this stage of the film. Kong's isolation is presented with increasing clarity, and the audience begins understanding that his relationship with Anne represents something far more meaningful than simple fascination. He sees in her a connection to a world beyond his own loneliness. This realization transforms the emotional stakes of the narrative because viewers recognize that the story is moving toward tragedy rather than triumph. The film's exploration of humanity's relationship with nature also becomes more pronounced. Characters repeatedly attempt to control, exploit, or dominate forces they do not fully understand, and the consequences of those actions continue shaping the narrative. Peter Jackson uses these themes to add depth to the spectacle, ensuring that the film remains intellectually engaging as well as visually impressive. By combining emotional storytelling, groundbreaking visual effects, extraordinary performances, immersive world building, memorable action sequences, and increasingly powerful thematic exploration, this portion of King Kong 2005 strengthens the movie's reputation as one of the most ambitious and emotionally resonant adventure films ever made while preparing audiences for the dramatic and heartbreaking events that will eventually define its unforgettable conclusion. King Kong 2005 becomes increasingly powerful as the narrative progresses because the film begins shifting its focus from pure adventure and survival toward the emotional consequences of the relationships that have developed throughout the story, and one of the most impressive achievements of this stage is the way Peter Jackson carefully balances large-scale spectacle with intimate character moments. Many blockbuster films struggle to maintain emotional depth once action begins dominating the narrative, but King Kong consistently remembers that its greatest strength lies not only in its visual effects or action sequences but in the emotional connections formed between its characters. The relationship between Anne Darrow and Kong continues evolving in ways that give the story its unique identity. What initially appeared to be a simple tale of captivity has transformed into something far more complicated and moving. Through shared experiences and moments of understanding, Anne begins seeing Kong as more than a monster, while Kong increasingly views Anne as the one source of companionship and acceptance in an otherwise lonely existence. This emotional bond is essential because it allows audiences to empathize with Kong on a deeply personal level. Andy Serkis continues delivering one of the most remarkable motion capture performances in cinema history, bringing an extraordinary range of emotions to the character. Through subtle expressions, body language, and behavior, Kong communicates fear, curiosity, protectiveness, frustration, joy, and sadness without needing a single line of dialogue. The audience understands him not because he speaks but because his emotions feel authentic. Naomi Watts complements this performance beautifully, creating scenes that feel surprisingly genuine despite one of the participants being a digital character. Their interactions remain among the most memorable and emotionally effective moments in the entire film. At the same time, Skull Island continues providing opportunities for breathtaking adventure. The island remains one of the most impressive fantasy environments ever created because every location feels distinct and filled with danger. Peter Jackson demonstrates extraordinary imagination in the design of the creatures, landscapes, and challenges encountered by the expedition. Rather than presenting a repetitive series of confrontations, the film constantly introduces new threats that maintain a sense of unpredictability. This variety helps sustain audience engagement while reinforcing the idea that Skull Island is an ancient ecosystem operating according to its own rules. The visual effects remain remarkable throughout these sequences. Even years after its release, the level of detail visible in the creatures, environments, and action scenes continues to impress. What makes the effects especially successful is the way they support storytelling rather than simply existing for spectacle. Every creature encounter contributes to the atmosphere of danger and wonder that defines the island. The action scenes remain exciting because they are connected to character goals and emotional stakes. Viewers are not simply watching visual effects, they are watching characters struggle to survive within an environment that constantly threatens them. Carl Denham's role becomes increasingly important during this stage because the consequences of his ambition become more apparent. Jack Black delivers a performance filled with energy and conviction, making Denham both fascinating and frustrating. He genuinely believes in the value of capturing something extraordinary, yet his obsession prevents him from recognizing the ethical implications of his actions. The film avoids reducing him to a simple villain, instead presenting him as a complex individual whose greatest strengths and greatest flaws emerge from the same source. His ambition drives innovation and adventure, but it also leads to exploitation and destruction. This complexity adds thematic richness because the story repeatedly questions whether the pursuit of success justifies the sacrifices required to achieve it. Adrien Brody's Jack Driscoll continues serving as an emotional anchor within the narrative. His growing concern for Anne and his willingness to risk his own safety for others reinforce themes of compassion, loyalty, and responsibility. The contrast between Driscoll and Denham becomes increasingly significant because they represent fundamentally different approaches to human relationships and ambition. The cinematography continues enhancing every aspect of the story. Wide shots emphasize the immense scale of Skull Island and the insignificance of the human characters within it, while more intimate compositions focus on emotional interactions and personal struggles. This visual balance helps maintain both the epic scope and emotional intimacy of the film. The musical score remains another major strength. The music constantly adapts to the changing tone of the narrative, providing excitement during action scenes, wonder during moments of discovery, and emotional resonance during quieter character interactions. Few films achieve such a seamless integration of music and storytelling. Themes of loneliness, belonging, exploitation, and humanity's relationship with nature become increasingly prominent as the story develops. Kong's isolation is no longer simply an aspect of his character but a central emotional element of the narrative. The audience increasingly understands that his connection with Anne represents something profoundly important to him. This realization transforms the film into a tragedy in progress because viewers begin recognizing that such a relationship cannot realistically survive the forces gathering around it. The film also continues exploring the consequences of humanity's desire to control and possess what it admires. Characters repeatedly encounter wonders beyond their understanding, yet their first instinct is often to capture, exploit, or profit from them. This theme adds depth to the adventure because it encourages audiences to think about the moral implications of the characters' choices. Peter Jackson's willingness to explore these ideas helps elevate King Kong beyond a traditional monster film. The pacing remains expansive, allowing emotional developments and thematic ideas sufficient time to resonate. While some viewers may consider the film lengthy, much of its emotional impact depends upon this deliberate structure. The audience must spend time with the characters, experience the beauty and danger of Skull Island, and witness the gradual development of relationships before the story's later events can achieve their full emotional power. By combining extraordinary visual effects, immersive world building, compelling performances, ambitious action sequences, emotional storytelling, and meaningful thematic exploration, this portion of King Kong 2005 further demonstrates why the film remains one of the most ambitious and emotionally resonant adventure epics of modern cinema, successfully blending spectacle and humanity in a way that few blockbuster films have ever achieved. King Kong 2005 continues evolving into something far more emotionally complex than a traditional adventure film because the narrative increasingly focuses on the consequences of the connections that have formed between its central characters, and one of the most remarkable achievements of this stage is the way Peter Jackson transforms what could have been a simple monster story into a deeply tragic examination of loneliness, empathy, ambition, and the human desire to control what it does not fully understand. The emotional relationship between Andero and Kong becomes even more important because it serves as the heart of the entire narrative. What makes their connection so effective is that it develops gradually through shared experiences rather than dramatic declarations. Anne begins recognizing that beneath Kong's immense physical power exists a creature capable of emotion, curiosity, protectiveness, and vulnerability. Likewise, Kong finds in Anne something he has likely never experienced before: companionship without fear or hostility. This relationship succeeds because the film allows audiences to observe it growing naturally. Rather than rushing toward emotional conclusions, Peter Jackson invests time in small interactions that reveal character and deepen understanding. These moments are among the most memorable in the movie because they demonstrate how empathy can emerge even between individuals from completely different worlds. Andy Serkis's performance remains extraordinary throughout these scenes. Through motion capture technology, he creates a character whose emotions are immediately recognizable and deeply affecting. Kong's expressions, movements, and reactions communicate feelings with a level of subtlety rarely achieved in digital performances. Naomi Watts continues matching this emotional intensity with a performance filled with sincerity, warmth, and compassion. Together they create one of the most unusual yet convincing emotional relationships ever depicted in a major blockbuster film. At the same time, the larger adventure narrative continues expanding in scope. Skull Island remains an astonishing achievement of world building because every location feels ancient, mysterious, and dangerous. The island is not presented merely as a backdrop for action sequences but as a fully realized environment with its own ecosystem and history. Peter Jackson's attention to detail helps maintain the illusion that this place genuinely exists. The prehistoric creatures, towering landscapes, hidden ruins, and dense jungles all contribute to an atmosphere of wonder and danger. Every new area explored by the characters feels capable of revealing something unexpected. This constant sense of discovery keeps the narrative engaging even during quieter moments. The action sequences continue demonstrating exceptional creativity and scale. Rather than relying on repetitive confrontations, the film presents challenges that vary dramatically in tone, environment, and intensity. Each sequence serves a narrative purpose while also contributing to character development and thematic exploration. The visual effects remain among the film's greatest accomplishments. Despite technological advances since the movie's release, much of the digital work continues looking impressive because it was designed with storytelling in mind rather than existing purely for spectacle. The creatures have weight, personality, and believable physical presence. Their interactions with the environment help reinforce the realism of the fantasy world being presented. Carl Denham's role becomes increasingly significant as the story progresses because his ambition continues driving many of the film's most important events. Jack Black delivers a performance that balances charisma and obsession in fascinating ways. Denham is not motivated by cruelty. He genuinely believes in the value of discovering and presenting extraordinary things to the world. However, his inability to recognize limits gradually transforms his ambition into something destructive. This complexity makes him one of the most interesting characters in the film because audiences can understand his motivations even while recognizing the damage his decisions create. The story repeatedly asks whether admiration justifies possession and whether the desire to share something remarkable can become harmful when it ignores ethical considerations. Adrien Brody's Jack Driscoll continues providing a more grounded perspective within the narrative. His concern for Anne and his willingness to place human relationships above personal ambition create an important contrast with Denham. Through Driscoll, the film explores themes of loyalty, compassion, and responsibility. The differences between these characters help reinforce the moral questions at the center of the story. The cinematography remains exceptional throughout this stage. Vast landscapes emphasize the immense scale of Skull Island while intimate character-focused shots highlight emotional development. This balance between spectacle and humanity is one of the reasons the film remains so effective. The audience is constantly reminded of both the grandeur of the adventure and the personal stakes involved. The musical score continues enhancing every scene through its ability to communicate wonder, suspense, excitement, and emotional vulnerability. The music often provides an additional layer of storytelling, helping audiences connect with the characters' experiences on a deeper level. Themes of isolation and belonging become increasingly prominent. Kong's loneliness is no longer simply implied but actively explored through his interactions with Anne. The audience begins understanding that his attachment to her is rooted in a profound need for connection. This realization gives the narrative increasing emotional weight because viewers recognize that Kong's greatest desire is not domination or destruction but companionship. The film also continues examining humanity's tendency to exploit what it admires. Characters repeatedly encounter beauty, mystery, and wonder, yet their instinct is often to capture and possess those things. This thematic exploration adds considerable depth to the adventure narrative because it encourages viewers to reflect on the consequences of such behavior. Peter Jackson's willingness to engage with these ideas helps distinguish the film from many other blockbuster productions. The pacing remains deliberate and expansive, allowing emotional relationships, thematic ideas, and world-building elements to develop fully. While some audiences may find the running time challenging, the emotional impact of the film depends heavily on this investment in detail and atmosphere. By combining groundbreaking visual effects, extraordinary performances, immersive world building, ambitious action sequences, emotional storytelling, and sophisticated thematic exploration, this portion of King Kong 2005 further strengthens the movie's reputation as one of the most ambitious and emotionally resonant adventure epics ever produced, proving that large-scale spectacle and genuine emotional depth can coexist within the same cinematic experience. King Kong 2005 reaches an even more emotionally charged stage because the narrative increasingly emphasizes the tragic consequences of humanity's inability to coexist with what it does not fully understand, and one of the most remarkable achievements of this portion of the film is the way it continues deepening audience sympathy for Kong while simultaneously expanding the scale of the story. By this point, Kong has evolved far beyond the role of a giant creature at the center of an adventure narrative. He has become a fully realized tragic figure whose emotional journey is just as important as the physical events unfolding around him. Peter Jackson's greatest accomplishment may be his ability to convince audiences that Kong's feelings matter as much as those of any human character. Through careful storytelling, detailed performance capture, and emotional continuity, the film creates a connection between viewers and Kong that remains powerful even years after the movie's release. Every major event now carries additional emotional weight because audiences understand what Kong stands to lose. His bond with Andero remains the emotional core of the narrative because it represents the one relationship in which he experiences genuine acceptance and understanding. Anne does not view him as a spectacle, a threat, or an opportunity. She sees him as a living being capable of emotion and deserving of compassion. This distinction becomes increasingly important because nearly everyone else who encounters Kong views him through a very different lens. Naomi Watts continues delivering a performance that anchors the emotional reality of the story. Her ability to communicate empathy and concern through subtle expressions and reactions helps maintain the credibility of this unusual relationship. Andy Serkis's performance remains extraordinary because Kong's emotional life is conveyed through physical behavior rather than dialogue. Small gestures, expressions, and movements reveal loneliness, confusion, affection, protectiveness, and vulnerability. These details transform Kong into one of the most emotionally complex characters in the film. The audience understands that beneath his immense strength lies a creature desperately seeking connection in a world that offers very little understanding. The visual effects continue supporting this emotional storytelling with remarkable effectiveness. Rather than existing solely to create spectacle, the digital work serves character and atmosphere. Kong feels tangible and present within every environment, and his interactions with the world around him possess a physical realism that strengthens audience investment. Even after many years, the combination of motion capture, animation, cinematography, and visual effects remains impressive because it prioritizes storytelling over technological display. Peter Jackson and his team clearly understood that the success of the film depended not on convincing audiences that Kong looked real but on convincing them that he felt real. Skull Island continues serving as a symbol of a world beyond human control. Throughout the film, the island has represented mystery, danger, beauty, and natural power, and those themes remain important during this stage of the narrative. The audience increasingly recognizes the contrast between the island's untamed environment and humanity's desire to dominate everything it encounters. The prehistoric creatures, towering landscapes, and ancient ruins continue reinforcing the sense that Skull Island belongs to a different age and operates according to principles that modern civilization cannot easily comprehend. This contrast adds thematic richness because it highlights the tension between nature and human ambition. Carl Denham remains one of the most fascinating characters in the story because he embodies the desire to possess and display the extraordinary. Jack Black's performance continues balancing enthusiasm, charisma, and obsession in a way that keeps the character compelling. Denham is not motivated by cruelty. He genuinely loves discovery and believes in sharing wonders with the world. However, his ambition prevents him from recognizing when admiration becomes exploitation. This moral blindness drives much of the film's tragedy because Denham consistently prioritizes achievement over empathy. The story does not portray him as evil but rather as someone whose strengths become destructive when separated from responsibility. This complexity gives the narrative additional depth and prevents its themes from becoming simplistic. Adrien Brody's Jack Driscoll continues representing an alternative perspective centered on compassion, loyalty, and understanding. His concern for Anne and his willingness to place human relationships above personal gain reinforce the film's broader moral themes. The contrast between Driscoll and Denham remains significant because it highlights two competing visions of how people should respond to the extraordinary. One seeks connection, while the other seeks ownership. The action sequences remain spectacular and ambitious, but Peter Jackson never allows them to overshadow the emotional core of the narrative. Every confrontation contributes to character development, thematic exploration, or emotional tension. This integration of spectacle and storytelling remains one of the film's defining strengths. The audience is entertained by the action while simultaneously becoming more invested in the characters and their relationships. The cinematography continues enhancing both the emotional and epic dimensions of the story. Large-scale compositions emphasize the grandeur of the environments and the insignificance of individuals within them, while intimate close-ups focus on emotional details that deepen audience connection. This balance between scale and intimacy allows the film to function successfully as both an epic adventure and a personal tragedy. The musical score remains another major strength, supporting every emotional development with precision and sensitivity. Themes of wonder, sorrow, excitement, and longing are communicated through music in ways that amplify the impact of the visuals and performances. Thematically, the film continues exploring loneliness, belonging, exploitation, beauty, ambition, and humanity's relationship with nature. Kong's isolation remains one of the most heartbreaking elements of the narrative because viewers now fully understand the depth of his emotional needs. He does not seek domination or destruction. He seeks companionship and acceptance. This understanding transforms the entire story into a tragedy about a creature trapped between worlds. The film also continues questioning humanity's instinct to control and profit from what it finds remarkable. Characters repeatedly encounter things that inspire awe, yet their first response is often to possess them rather than respect them. This theme remains deeply relevant because it reflects broader questions about power, responsibility, and the consequences of treating living beings as objects. The pacing continues allowing these ideas to develop naturally, ensuring that every emotional beat and thematic revelation receives sufficient attention. By combining extraordinary performances, groundbreaking visual effects, immersive world building, powerful emotional storytelling, ambitious action sequences, and profound thematic depth, this portion of King Kong 2005 further demonstrates why the film remains one of the most ambitious and emotionally resonant adventure epics ever produced, steadily guiding audiences toward the tragic and unforgettable climax that defines its enduring legacy. King Kong 2005 continues moving steadily toward its tragic and emotionally devastating conclusion because the narrative increasingly focuses on the clash between the natural world represented by Kong and the human world represented by those determined to control, display, and profit from him. And one of the greatest achievements of this stage of the film is the way Peter Jackson transforms a giant creature into one of the most sympathetic and emotionally engaging characters in modern cinema. By this point, the audience no longer views Kong through the same perspective as the human characters who encounter him. Viewers understand his motivations, recognize his loneliness, and appreciate the genuine bond he has formed with Andero. This difference in perspective creates tremendous emotional tension because the audience can see the tragedy approaching long before many of the characters fully understand the consequences of their actions. The film carefully builds this feeling throughout its lengthy running time, ensuring that every decision carries greater emotional significance as events continue unfolding. The relationship between Anne and Kong remains the emotional center of the story because it represents a rare connection built on understanding rather than fear. Anne has come to see Kong not as a monster but as a living being capable of kindness, curiosity, protectiveness, and emotional vulnerability. Kong, in turn, sees Anne as the one person who understands him and treats him with compassion rather than hostility. What makes this relationship so effective is that it never feels forced. Peter Jackson develops it gradually through shared experiences, small interactions, and moments of trust. Naomi Watts continues delivering an exceptional performance that grounds the emotional core of the narrative. Her reactions to Kong always feel authentic, allowing audiences to believe completely in the connection between them. Andy Serkis's motion capture work remains extraordinary because every movement, expression, and gesture communicates emotion with remarkable clarity. Kong's performance often conveys more emotional truth than many dialogue-heavy characters in other films. His loneliness, hope, protectiveness, and confusion are all visible through subtle details, making him one of the most memorable cinematic creations of the 21st century. The visual effects continue serving the story rather than dominating it. Although King Kong was released in 2005, much of its digital work remains impressive because it was designed to support character and atmosphere. Kong feels physically present within every environment, and his interactions with both the world and the people around him maintain emotional credibility. This achievement is particularly important because the film's success depends upon audiences accepting Kong as a genuine character rather than simply a visual effect. Peter Jackson and his team accomplish this through careful attention to performance, animation, cinematography, and storytelling. Skull Island continues functioning as one of the most remarkable settings in adventure cinema. Even as the narrative increasingly focuses on emotional themes, the island remains a place of wonder and danger. The audience is constantly reminded that this environment exists according to its own rules, untouched by the structures and expectations of the modern world. The prehistoric creatures, immense landscapes, and mysterious ruins all contribute to a sense of ancient grandeur. The island symbolizes a world that humanity does not fully understand yet constantly attempts to dominate. This symbolism becomes increasingly important as the film explores themes of exploitation and control. Carl Denham's character continues gaining thematic significance because he embodies humanity's desire to capture and possess what it admires. Jack Black delivers one of the most interesting performances of his career, portraying Denham as both visionary and deeply flawed. He is fascinated by the extraordinary and genuinely believes that sharing such wonders with the world is valuable. However, his ambition repeatedly blinds him to ethical concerns. The audience increasingly sees that his pursuit of success carries consequences extending far beyond his original intentions. Denham's complexity prevents the film from offering simple moral judgments. Instead, it presents a character whose strengths and weaknesses originate from the same qualities: imagination, determination, and relentless ambition. Adrien Brody's Jack Driscoll remains an important emotional counterpoint. His concern for Anne and his emphasis on compassion over achievement reinforce the story's broader themes regarding empathy and responsibility. The contrast between Driscoll and Denham continues, highlighting two fundamentally different approaches to life. One values relationships and understanding, while the other prioritizes accomplishment and recognition. This contrast enriches the narrative and strengthens its thematic exploration. The action sequences remain spectacular, but their purpose increasingly extends beyond excitement. Each confrontation contributes to the emotional and thematic development of the story. Peter Jackson consistently ensures that action reveals character and advances narrative momentum rather than existing solely for visual spectacle. This approach helps maintain emotional investment even during the film's most elaborate sequences. The cinematography remains exceptional throughout this stage. Sweeping landscape shots emphasize the scale and majesty of the world being depicted, while intimate close-ups capture emotional nuances that deepen audience connection to the characters. The balance between epic scope and personal emotion continues defining the film's visual identity. The musical score remains equally important, providing emotional texture and enhancing every major development. Whether expressing wonder, fear, sorrow, excitement, or tenderness, the music consistently strengthens the storytelling. Themes of loneliness, belonging, exploitation, beauty, ambition, and humanity's relationship with nature become increasingly central as the narrative progresses. Kong's isolation remains one of the most powerful emotional elements in the film because viewers understand that his greatest desire is companionship rather than domination. This understanding transforms the story into a tragedy about a creature whose emotional needs place him in conflict with a world incapable of accepting him. The film also continues examining the consequences of treating living beings as objects to be possessed or displayed. Characters repeatedly attempt to control what they find extraordinary rather than respecting its independence, and the narrative increasingly highlights the destructive consequences of that mindset. The pacing remains deliberate and expansive because Peter Jackson wants every emotional development and thematic idea to resonate fully. Rather than rushing toward its conclusion, the film carefully builds emotional investment so that later events carry maximum impact. By combining groundbreaking visual effects, extraordinary performances, immersive world building, ambitious action, emotional storytelling, and profound thematic exploration, this portion of King Kong 2005 further establishes the film as one of the most ambitious and emotionally powerful adventure epics ever created, preparing audiences for the heartbreaking events that will ultimately define its unforgettable legacy. King Kong 2005 reaches an increasingly emotional and dramatic stage because the story begins moving beyond the excitement of exploration and survival and starts concentrating on the unavoidable consequences of the decisions made throughout the journey, and one of the most impressive aspects of this portion of the film is the way Peter Jackson carefully increases the emotional stakes while maintaining the sense of wonder and spectacle that has defined the adventure from the beginning. The audience now understands Kong not as a monster but as a fully realized character with desires, fears, instincts, and emotions, and this understanding fundamentally changes the way every scene involving him is experienced. Earlier in the film, viewers may have admired Kong because of his strength and presence, but at this stage they begin sympathizing with him because they recognize his loneliness and vulnerability. This emotional connection is the foundation upon which the later sections of the narrative are built, and it is one of the reasons the film remains so memorable. The relationship between Darrow and Kong continues to deepen because both characters have come to trust each other in ways neither could have imagined when they first met. What makes their connection so effective is that it develops through actions rather than dialogue. Kong protects Anne repeatedly, not because he expects anything in return but because he values her presence. Anne responds with empathy and understanding, gradually seeing beyond his frightening appearance and recognizing the emotional complexity beneath it. Naomi Watts continues delivering a remarkable performance that makes these interactions believable and emotionally engaging. She never treats Kong as a special effect. Instead, she reacts to him as though he were a genuine living being, and this commitment allows the audience to do the same. Andy Serkis remains extraordinary throughout these scenes, using subtle movements and expressions to communicate feelings that words could never adequately express. The emotional authenticity of Kong's performance remains one of the greatest achievements in motion capture acting and continues to influence how digital characters are portrayed in cinema today. Skull Island itself remains a major strength of the film because it continues feeling vast, dangerous, and mysterious. Peter Jackson's world building is so detailed that the island seems to possess its own history and identity. Every location appears shaped by centuries of natural evolution and survival, creating an environment that feels believable despite its fantastical elements. The audience never knows what dangers might emerge next, and this unpredictability contributes significantly to the tension. The visual effects continue impressing because they support the storytelling rather than overwhelming it. The creatures inhabiting the island feel like genuine parts of a larger ecosystem, while the environments possess texture and scale that make the world feel real. Even during the most elaborate action sequences, the audience remains emotionally invested because the spectacle is connected directly to character experiences and narrative progression. The action itself remains among the most ambitious ever attempted in an adventure film. Peter Jackson consistently demonstrates an ability to create sequences that are both visually exciting and emotionally meaningful. Every major confrontation serves a purpose beyond simple entertainment. Characters reveal their courage, fears, loyalties, and priorities through the choices they make under pressure. This approach helps the film maintain emotional engagement even during its most spectacular moments. Carl Denham continues emerging as one of the most fascinating characters in the story because the consequences of his ambition become increasingly apparent. Jack Black's performance remains effective because he portrays Denham as someone genuinely captivated by the extraordinary. His problem is not a lack of imagination but an inability to recognize the moral limits that should accompany ambition. Denham sees something remarkable and immediately imagines how it can be shared with the world, yet he rarely considers whether doing so is right. This complexity prevents the character from becoming simplistic and adds thematic depth to the narrative. The film repeatedly asks whether admiration can become exploitation when it is accompanied by a desire for ownership and control. Adrien Brody's Jack Driscoll continues serving as an emotional counterbalance to Denham. His concern for Anne and his willingness to prioritize human connection over personal achievement reinforce the film's broader themes regarding compassion and responsibility. The contrast between Driscoll and Denham becomes increasingly important because it highlights two very different ways of responding to the extraordinary. One seeks understanding, while the other seeks possession. The cinematography remains exceptional, balancing grand landscapes with intimate emotional moments. Wide shots emphasize the scale of the island and the vulnerability of those attempting to survive within it, while close-up shots focus on expressions and reactions that reveal character development. This visual approach helps maintain the film's balance between epic adventure and personal drama. The musical score continues enhancing every aspect of the narrative. Whether communicating wonder, danger, excitement, sorrow, or tenderness, the music consistently strengthens the emotional impact of each scene. Themes of loneliness, belonging, exploitation, and humanity's relationship with nature become increasingly significant. Kong's isolation is now fully understood by the audience, making his connection with Anne even more moving. The film suggests that his greatest desire is not power but companionship, and this realization transforms him into a tragic figure rather than a monstrous one. At the same time, humanity's tendency to capture, display, and profit from what it finds extraordinary continues serving as a central thematic concern. Characters repeatedly encounter things of immense beauty and significance, yet their instinct is often to possess them rather than respect them. This idea gives the narrative lasting relevance because it reflects broader questions about human behavior and our relationship with the natural world. The pacing remains deliberate, allowing emotional developments and thematic ideas sufficient time to resonate. Every scene contributes to the growing sense that the story is moving toward an outcome that may be inevitable yet still heartbreaking. By combining extraordinary performances, groundbreaking visual effects, immersive world building, powerful emotional storytelling, ambitious action sequences, and sophisticated thematic exploration, this portion of King Kong 2005 further strengthens the film's reputation as one of the most emotionally resonant and artistically ambitious adventure epics ever produced, preparing audiences for the profound tragedy and unforgettable drama that await in the later stages of the narrative. King Kong 2005 continues building toward its emotional and dramatic peak because the narrative gradually begins shifting from exploration and survival toward the inevitable consequences of the choices made by its characters, and one of the most powerful aspects of this stage of the film is the growing sense that the story is moving toward a tragedy that cannot be avoided. Peter Jackson carefully develops this feeling by allowing audiences to become deeply invested in Kong, Anne Darrow, and the world of Skull Island before introducing the decisions that will ultimately change all of their lives. What makes this progression so effective is that viewers understand the motivations behind those decisions even when they recognize the dangers involved. The film never presents events as simple conflicts between heroes and villains. Instead, it explores how ambition, curiosity, fear, and desire can lead people toward outcomes they never fully anticipated. This complexity gives the narrative emotional richness and helps distinguish it from more conventional adventure stories. The relationship between Anne and Kong continues serving as the emotional center of the film because their connection becomes increasingly meaningful as the story develops. What began as fear and uncertainty has evolved into trust and understanding. Anne recognizes that Kong is not the mindless beast many people would assume him to be. She sees his intelligence, emotional depth, and loneliness. Kong, in turn, views Anne as someone capable of understanding him in a way no one else ever has. The film spends significant time exploring this bond because it understands that the audience must care deeply about their relationship for the later stages of the story to achieve their full emotional impact. Naomi Watts continues delivering one of the strongest performances of her career, bringing sincerity and emotional authenticity to every interaction. Andy Serkis remains extraordinary as Kong, using subtle physical performance and facial expression to create a character who often communicates more effectively without words than many human characters do through dialogue. Their scenes together remain some of the most memorable moments in the entire movie because they reveal the humanity within a creature often viewed only as a monster. Skull Island itself continues feeling alive and dangerous throughout this stage of the narrative. The island remains one of the greatest achievements in cinematic world building because it functions as far more than a setting. Every environment feels distinct, every creature appears connected to a larger ecosystem, and every location contributes to the atmosphere of mystery and danger. Peter Jackson's attention to detail allows the audience to believe in the reality of this impossible place. The visual effects continue supporting this illusion remarkably well. Even years after the film's release, the combination of practical filmmaking techniques and digital technology remains impressive because the effects are integrated into the storytelling rather than existing solely for spectacle. The creatures inhabiting Skull Island possess unique identities and behaviors, making the world feel coherent and believable despite its fantastical nature. The action sequences continue showcasing Jackson's ability to create large-scale excitement while maintaining emotional investment. Every major confrontation carries meaningful stakes because the audience cares about the characters involved. Rather than presenting action as empty spectacle, the film uses these sequences to advance relationships, reveal character traits, and reinforce thematic ideas. This approach helps sustain engagement throughout the movie's lengthy running time because viewers remain emotionally connected to the narrative even during its most spectacular moments. Carl Denham becomes increasingly fascinating as the consequences of his ambition become more visible. Jack Black delivers a nuanced performance that prevents the character from becoming one-dimensional. Denham's passion for discovery and storytelling remains understandable, but his willingness to ignore ethical concerns in pursuit of success becomes increasingly troubling. The film explores the dangerous side of ambition by showing how noble intentions can become destructive when they are not balanced by responsibility and empathy. Denham believes he is pursuing greatness, yet his inability to recognize boundaries creates consequences far beyond what he anticipated. This thematic exploration gives the story additional depth because it raises questions about the costs of achievement and the moral responsibilities associated with power and influence. Adrien Brody's Jack Driscoll continues serving as an important emotional counterweight within the narrative. His growing concern for Anne and his commitment to protecting others reinforce themes of compassion and selflessness. The contrast between Driscoll's priorities and Denham's ambitions becomes increasingly significant because it highlights different ways of responding to extraordinary circumstances. One character seeks connection and understanding, while the other seeks accomplishment and recognition. This contrast enriches the story by providing multiple perspectives on the same events. The cinematography remains exceptional throughout this stage. Wide shots emphasize the immense scale of the island and the insignificance of human beings within it, while close-up compositions focus on emotional details and character interactions. This visual balance helps maintain both the epic scope and intimate emotional core of the narrative. The musical score continues elevating the experience by providing emotional resonance during quieter moments and excitement during action sequences. Few blockbuster films use music so effectively to support both spectacle and character development. Themes of loneliness, exploitation, ambition, belonging, and humanity's relationship with nature become increasingly prominent as the narrative progresses. King Kong continues delivering emotional impact at this stage because the narrative has reached a point where every major relationship, theme, and character arc carries the weight of everything that has come before, and one of the most impressive qualities of the film is the way Peter Jackson ensures that the audience never loses sight of the emotional truth at the center of the story despite the enormous scale of the production. By now, viewers understand that the film's true subject has never been giant creatures, prehistoric islands, or spectacular action sequences. Those elements provide the framework for a much more personal story about connection, isolation, empathy, and loss. Kong remains the emotional center of that story because his experiences reflect many of the themes that have gradually emerged throughout the narrative. He exists as a creature of immense power, yet he is ultimately defined by emotional vulnerability. This contrast continues making him one of the most compelling characters in the film. The audience understands that his greatest struggle is not survival but acceptance. He possesses the strength to overcome physical threats, yet he cannot overcome the fear, misunderstanding, and ambition that shape the behavior of the people around him. This realization gives the story a tragic quality that becomes increasingly powerful as events continue unfolding. Andy Serkis deserves enormous credit for this achievement because his performance consistently communicates emotional complexity through movement, expression, and physical presence. Kong's feelings are never difficult to understand because they are presented with honesty and clarity. His moments of curiosity, affection, protectiveness, frustration, and sorrow all feel authentic. As a result, audiences respond to him not as a special effect but as a fully realized character whose experiences matter. Naomi Watts continues providing the emotional perspective that allows viewers to recognize Kong's humanity. Her portrayal of Ann Darrow remains compassionate and sincere, and her interactions with Kong continue serving as some of the most emotionally effective scenes in the film. What makes their relationship so memorable is the absence of manipulation. Their bond develops naturally through trust and understanding. Ann sees Kong as an individual rather than a curiosity, and Kong responds to that rare kindness with loyalty and affection. This connection remains central to the film because it demonstrates the possibility of empathy across seemingly impossible differences. The visual effects continue supporting the emotional narrative with remarkable effectiveness. Even during scenes involving massive environments and complex action, Kong remains expressive and believable. The technical achievements are impressive, but what truly matters is the way those achievements support storytelling. Every visual element contributes to the audience's emotional investment, ensuring that spectacle never overshadows character. Thematically, the film continues exploring the tension between admiration and exploitation. Throughout the narrative, people repeatedly encounter things that inspire wonder, yet their response is often to possess, display, or profit from them. Kong remains the ultimate example of this pattern. His uniqueness attracts attention, but that attention ultimately becomes a source of danger. The film argues that fascination without empathy can become destructive because it reduces living beings to objects. This idea remains one of the story's most powerful themes because it extends beyond the specific events of the plot and encourages viewers to consider broader questions regarding humanity's relationship with nature and the unknown. Carl Denham continues serving as the clearest expression of this theme. Jack Black's performance remains compelling because Denham is driven by genuine enthusiasm rather than cruelty. He loves discovery, storytelling, and extraordinary experiences. However, his ambition consistently prevents him from recognizing limits. He sees wonders and immediately imagines how they can be presented to the world. This inability to separate appreciation from possession drives much of the narrative's tragedy. Denham remains fascinating because his flaws emerge from qualities that are otherwise admirable. The film avoids simplistic moral judgments and instead presents a complex portrait of ambition and its consequences. Adrien Brody's Jack Driscoll continues functioning as an important contrast. His priorities remain focused on compassion, loyalty, and personal responsibility. Through Driscoll, the narrative emphasizes the value of understanding over ownership and connection over achievement. The contrast between these perspectives continues enriching the story and reinforcing its central themes. The cinematography remains extraordinary throughout this stage, balancing epic scale with intimate emotional detail. Wide compositions emphasize the grandeur of the world and the significance of the events taking place, while close-up shots reveal subtle emotional reactions that deepen audience engagement. This visual approach allows the film to maintain both its blockbuster scope and its emotional intimacy. The musical score remains equally important. The music consistently enhances the emotional power of every scene, communicating wonder, sorrow, longing, tension, and heartbreak with remarkable effectiveness. Themes of loneliness, belonging, beauty, ambition, exploitation, compassion, and humanity's relationship with nature continue growing stronger as the narrative approaches its final resolution. Kong's longing for acceptance remains particularly moving because it is such a simple and universal desire. The audience understands that beneath his extraordinary appearance lies a need that is fundamentally human. This understanding gives the film much of its emotional power and explains why Kong remains such a memorable figure. As the story moves ever closer to its conclusion, the sense of inevitability becomes stronger. The audience understands that the forces shaping the narrative are moving toward a resolution that will define the meaning of everything that has come before. Peter Jackson carefully uses this growing tension to deepen emotional investment, ensuring that every scene contributes to the larger themes of the film. By combining exceptional performances, groundbreaking visual effects, rich thematic exploration, immersive world building, emotional storytelling, and breathtaking cinematic scale, this portion of King Kong 2005 continues demonstrating why the film remains one of the most ambitious and emotionally resonant adventure epics ever created, further strengthening its reputation as a modern cinematic tragedy built upon empathy, wonder, and the heartbreaking consequences of misunderstanding. Kong's isolation continues serving as one of the film's most powerful emotional elements because audiences now fully understand his desire for companionship and connection. The story also continues questioning humanity's instinct to possess and control what it finds extraordinary. Characters repeatedly encounter wonders beyond their understanding, yet their first impulse is often to capture and profit from them. This theme gives the film philosophical depth while reinforcing the tragedy gradually emerging at the center of the story. The pacing remains deliberate because Peter Jackson wants every emotional development and thematic idea to resonate fully before the narrative reaches its most dramatic moments. By combining extraordinary performances, groundbreaking visual effects, immersive world building, memorable action sequences, emotional storytelling, and increasingly powerful thematic exploration, this portion of King Kong 2005 further establishes the film as a rare blockbuster capable of delivering both spectacular entertainment and profound emotional impact, preparing audiences for the heartbreaking and unforgettable events that will define the final chapters of the story. King Kong continues delivering emotional impact at this stage because the narrative has reached a point where every major relationship, theme, and character arc carries the weight of everything that has come before, and one of the most impressive qualities of the film is the way Peter Jackson ensures that the audience never loses sight of the emotional truth at the center of the story despite the enormous scale of the production. By now, viewers understand that the film's true subject has never been giant creatures, prehistoric islands, or spectacular action sequences. Those elements provide the framework for a much more personal story about connection, isolation, empathy, and loss. Kong remains the emotional center of that story because his experiences reflect many of the themes that have gradually emerged throughout the narrative. He exists as a creature of immense power, yet he is ultimately defined by emotional vulnerability. This contrast continues making him one of the most compelling characters in the film. The audience understands that his greatest struggle is not survival but acceptance. He possesses the strength to overcome physical threats, yet he cannot overcome the fear, misunderstanding, and ambition that shape the behavior of the people around him. This realization gives the story a tragic quality that becomes increasingly powerful as events continue unfolding. Andy Serkis deserves enormous credit for this achievement because his performance consistently communicates emotional complexity through movement, expression, and physical presence. Kong's feelings are never difficult to understand because they are presented with honesty and clarity. His moments of curiosity, affection, protectiveness, frustration, and sorrow all feel authentic. As a result, audiences respond to him not as a special effect but as a fully realized character whose experiences matter. Naomi Watts continues providing the emotional perspective that allows viewers to recognize Kong's humanity. Her portrayal of Anne Darrow remains compassionate and sincere, and her interactions with Kong continue serving as some of the most emotionally effective scenes in the film. What makes their relationship so memorable is the absence of manipulation. Their bond develops naturally through trust and understanding. Anne sees Kong as an individual rather than a curiosity, and Kong responds to that rare kindness with loyalty and affection. This connection remains central to the film because it demonstrates the possibility of empathy across seemingly impossible differences. The visual effects continue supporting the emotional narrative with remarkable effectiveness. Even during scenes involving massive environments and complex action, Kong remains expressive and believable. The technical achievements are impressive, but what truly matters is the way those achievements support storytelling. Every visual element contributes to the audience's emotional investment, ensuring that spectacle never overshadows character. Thematically, the film continues exploring the tension between admiration and exploitation. Throughout the narrative, people repeatedly encounter things that inspire wonder, yet their response is often to possess, display, or profit from them. Kong remains the ultimate example of this pattern. His uniqueness attracts attention, but that attention ultimately becomes a source of danger. The film argues that fascination without empathy can become destructive because it reduces living beings to objects. This idea remains one of the story's most powerful themes because it extends beyond the specific events of the plot and encourages viewers to consider broader questions regarding humanity's relationship with nature and the unknown. Carl Denham continues serving as the clearest expression of this theme. Jack Black's performance remains compelling because Denham is driven by genuine enthusiasm rather than cruelty. He loves discovery, storytelling, and extraordinary experiences. However, his ambition consistently prevents him from recognizing limits. He sees wonders and immediately imagines how they can be presented to the world. This inability to separate appreciation from possession drives much of the narrative's tragedy. Denham remains fascinating because his flaws emerge from qualities that are otherwise admirable. The film avoids simplistic moral judgments and instead presents a complex portrait of ambition and its consequences. Adrien Brody's Jack Driscoll continues functioning as an important contrast. His priorities remain focused on compassion, loyalty, and personal responsibility. Through Driscoll, the narrative emphasizes the value of understanding over ownership and connection over achievement. The contrast between these perspectives continues enriching the story and reinforcing its central themes. The cinematography remains extraordinary throughout this stage, balancing epic scale with intimate emotional detail. Wide compositions emphasize the grandeur of the world and the significance of the events taking place, while close-up shots reveal subtle emotional reactions that deepen audience engagement. This visual approach allows the film to maintain both its blockbuster scope and its emotional intimacy. The musical score remains equally important. The music consistently enhances the emotional power of every scene, communicating wonder, sorrow, longing, tension, and heartbreak with remarkable effectiveness. Themes of loneliness, belonging, beauty, ambition, exploitation, compassion, and humanity's relationship with nature continue growing stronger as the narrative approaches its final resolution. Kong's longing for acceptance remains particularly moving because it is such a simple and universal desire. The audience understands that beneath his extraordinary appearance lies a need that is fundamentally human. This understanding gives the film much of its emotional power and explains why Kong remains such a memorable figure. As the story moves ever closer to its conclusion, the sense of inevitability becomes stronger. The audience understands that the forces shaping the narrative are moving toward a resolution that will define the meaning of everything that has come before. Peter Jackson carefully uses this growing tension to deepen emotional investment, ensuring that every scene contributes to the larger themes of the film. By combining exceptional performances, groundbreaking visual effects, rich thematic exploration, immersive world building, emotional storytelling, and breathtaking cinematic scale, this portion of King Kong 2005 continues demonstrating why the film remains one of the most ambitious and emotionally resonant adventure epics ever created, further strengthening its reputation as a modern cinematic tragedy built upon empathy, wonder, and the heartbreaking consequences of misunderstanding. King Kong reaches one of its most profound and emotionally resonant stages because every major theme developed throughout the narrative now carries tremendous weight, and one of the film's greatest accomplishments during this portion is the way it transforms what could have been remembered merely as a visually impressive blockbuster into a deeply human tragedy about loneliness, compassion, ambition, and the inability of different worlds to truly understand one another. By this point, the audience's emotional connection to Kong is so strong that the scale of the spectacle becomes secondary to the emotional reality of his experience. The remarkable achievement of Peter Jackson's storytelling is that viewers no longer judge events according to who is stronger or who survives the next challenge. Instead, they evaluate everything through the lens of empathy. Kong has become a character whose emotional needs are completely understood by the audience, and that understanding creates a powerful sense of tension because viewers recognize how vulnerable he truly is despite his enormous physical power. Throughout the film he has demonstrated strength, courage, determination, and resilience, yet his greatest defining characteristic remains his desire for connection. This emotional vulnerability continues making him one of the most memorable characters in modern cinema. Andy Serkis's performance remains extraordinary because every movement and expression contributes to a character who feels entirely alive. Kong's reactions communicate complex emotions with remarkable clarity, allowing audiences to understand his thoughts and feelings without the need for dialogue. His loneliness remains one of the film's most heartbreaking elements because it has been developed with such patience and consistency. The audience understands that beneath the intimidating appearance exists a being searching for companionship and acceptance. Naomi Watts continues providing the emotional bridge between Kong and the audience through her portrayal of Ann Darrow. Her compassion and willingness to see Kong as an individual rather than a spectacle remain essential to the story's emotional effectiveness. What makes their relationship so moving is its simplicity. It is not built upon self-interest or expectation but upon mutual recognition. Anne understands Kong in a way that few others ever attempt to, and that understanding gives their connection extraordinary significance. The visual effects continue serving the narrative with remarkable effectiveness because every technical achievement remains focused on supporting character and emotion. Kong never feels like a collection of digital effects. He feels like a living presence whose experiences matter. This emotional credibility is one of the primary reasons the film has remained so respected over the years. Thematically, the story continues examining the dangers of exploitation and the human tendency to treat extraordinary things as possessions rather than independent realities deserving respect. Throughout the narrative, characters have repeatedly encountered wonders beyond ordinary experience, yet their first instinct has often been to capture, display, or profit from them. Kong's situation represents the ultimate expression of this theme because he is admired precisely because he is unique. The tragedy is that this admiration prevents many people from seeing him as an individual. Instead, he becomes an object of fascination. The film argues that admiration without empathy can become destructive, and this idea gives the narrative lasting philosophical depth. Carl Denham remains central to this thematic exploration. Jack Black continues delivering a performance filled with charisma, energy, and complexity. Denham's fascination with the extraordinary is genuine, but his ambition repeatedly prevents him from recognizing the consequences of his actions. He represents humanity's desire to possess what inspires wonder, and through him the film explores the moral risks associated with unchecked ambition. His character remains compelling because his motivations are understandable even when his decisions produce harmful results. Adrien Brody's Jack Driscoll continues serving as a contrast to Denham. His focus on compassion, responsibility, and personal connection reinforces many of the film's central values. Through Driscoll, the narrative emphasizes the importance of understanding rather than ownership and empathy rather than exploitation. The contrast between these perspectives continues enriching the story and providing moral complexity. The cinematography remains exceptional, balancing enormous scale with intimate emotional detail. Sweeping images emphasize the grandeur of the world while close-up shots reveal subtle emotional reactions that deepen audience engagement. This balance allows the film to operate simultaneously as an epic adventure and a deeply personal tragedy. The musical score remains equally effective, strengthening every emotional moment through themes that communicate wonder, sorrow, longing, and heartbreak. The music often expresses emotions that words cannot fully capture, making it one of the film's most important storytelling elements. Themes of loneliness, belonging, beauty, ambition, compassion, exploitation, and humanity's relationship with nature continue reaching their fullest expression during this stage. Kong's journey increasingly feels symbolic of the struggle faced by anything unique or extraordinary when confronted by systems determined to categorize, control, and possess it. The audience understands that his greatest desire has never been power or dominance. It has always been acceptance and companionship. This realization gives the story extraordinary emotional power because it reveals how simple and relatable his motivations truly are. As the narrative moves closer to its final resolution, every scene carries a growing sense of inevitability. The emotional investment built throughout the film ensures that even quiet moments feel significant because viewers understand what is at stake. By combining extraordinary performances, groundbreaking visual effects, immersive world building, emotional storytelling, thematic sophistication, and spectacular cinematic scale, this portion of King Kong 2005 further demonstrates why the film remains one of the most ambitious and emotionally affecting adventure epics ever produced, deepening its exploration of humanity, tragedy, and connection while preparing audiences for the unforgettable culmination of Kong's story. King Kong reaches the point where all of its major themes begin converging toward a powerful and emotionally overwhelming resolution because the narrative is no longer concerned primarily with adventure, discovery, or spectacle but with the consequences of the choices that have been made throughout the story, and one of the most impressive achievements of this stage is the way Peter Jackson maintains complete emotional focus despite the enormous scale of the events unfolding on screen. Many large blockbuster films struggle to preserve emotional intimacy during their climactic sections, yet King Kong consistently ensures that every moment remains connected to character and theme. The audience has spent so much time understanding Kong's perspective that the story's central conflict no longer feels like a battle between humans and a giant creature. Instead, it feels like a tragedy involving a being who cannot find a place within a world determined to define him according to its own expectations. This emotional transformation is one of the film's greatest accomplishments because it completely alters the way viewers interpret the narrative. Kong remains the emotional heart of the story because his journey embodies nearly every major theme explored throughout the film. He represents loneliness, vulnerability, strength, beauty, and the desire for connection. Although physically powerful enough to overcome almost any obstacle, he remains emotionally fragile because of the importance he places on the relationships he forms. This contrast between physical dominance and emotional vulnerability gives the character extraordinary depth. Andy Serkis continues delivering a performance of remarkable subtlety and power. Every movement communicates something meaningful about Kong's state of mind. The audience understands his confusion, determination, affection, and sorrow through behavior rather than dialogue, making the performance all the more impressive. By this stage of the film, viewers are no longer watching Kong because they are fascinated by his size or strength. They are watching because they genuinely care about him as a character. This level of emotional investment is rare in any genre and almost unprecedented in a film centered around a giant creature. Naomi Watts continues playing a crucial role in sustaining this emotional connection. Her portrayal of Anne Darrow remains compassionate and sincere, allowing audiences to understand why Kong values her presence so deeply. Anne's ability to recognize Kong's humanity becomes increasingly significant because she represents one of the few people willing to see beyond appearances. Their relationship remains central to the narrative because it demonstrates the possibility of understanding across enormous differences. What makes their bond so moving is that it is based on empathy rather than self-interest. Neither character seeks anything from the other beyond companionship and acceptance. This simplicity gives their connection extraordinary emotional power. The visual effects continue supporting the narrative in impressive ways. Even during the largest and most technically ambitious sequences, the film never loses sight of character. Kong remains expressive and emotionally engaging because every visual element is designed to reinforce performance rather than overshadow it. Peter Jackson's creative team clearly understood that spectacle alone would never be enough. The audience needed to believe in Kong emotionally, and that belief remains one of the film's greatest achievements. Thematically, the story continues examining humanity's relationship with the extraordinary. Throughout the narrative, characters have repeatedly attempted to capture, possess, exploit, or profit from things that inspire wonder. Kong represents the ultimate expression of this theme because he is both admired and misunderstood. People are fascinated by him precisely because he is unique, yet that fascination ultimately prevents them from recognizing his individuality. The film suggests that humanity often values ownership more than understanding, and this tendency produces devastating consequences. This idea remains one of the story's most enduring strengths because it extends far beyond the specific events depicted on screen. It raises broader questions about power, responsibility, and the way people interact with forces they cannot fully comprehend. Carl Denham continues serving as a symbol of these themes. Jack Black's performance remains complex and engaging because Denham is motivated by genuine passion rather than cruelty. He loves discovery and believes deeply in the importance of sharing extraordinary experiences with the world. However, his ambition consistently prevents him from recognizing ethical limits. He sees wonders as opportunities rather than independent realities deserving respect. This flaw drives much of the tragedy because it illustrates how admiration can become destructive when separated from empathy. Denham remains one of the film's most interesting characters because he embodies both the excitement and danger of human ambition. Adrien Brody's Jack Driscoll continues providing a contrasting perspective centered on compassion and responsibility. His priorities remain focused on protecting others and preserving meaningful relationships. Through Driscoll, the film argues that understanding and empathy are ultimately more valuable than achievement and recognition. The contrast between Driscoll and Denham continues enriching the narrative because it presents two fundamentally different responses to the extraordinary. The cinematography remains exceptional throughout this stage. Large-scale images emphasize the enormity of the world and the significance of the events unfolding, while intimate compositions focus on emotional details that deepen audience investment. This balance allows the film to function simultaneously as a spectacular adventure and a deeply personal tragedy. The musical score remains equally important. Every major emotional development is supported by music that communicates longing, sorrow, wonder, and heartbreak. The score often amplifies emotions that characters themselves cannot express directly, making it one of the film's most effective storytelling tools. Themes of loneliness, belonging, exploitation, beauty, ambition, compassion, and humanity's relationship with nature continue reaching their fullest expression during this stage. Kong's isolation remains especially heartbreaking because the audience fully understands that his greatest desire has always been simple acceptance. He does not seek domination, wealth, or power. He seeks connection. The tragedy lies in the fact that the world surrounding him remains largely incapable of recognizing this truth. As the narrative moves steadily toward its conclusion, every scene carries a growing sense of emotional inevitability. The audience understands that the story is approaching a moment of profound significance, and Peter Jackson carefully ensures that every thematic idea, character relationship, and emotional development contributes to that approaching resolution. By combining extraordinary performances, groundbreaking visual effects, immersive world building, emotional storytelling, ambitious spectacle, and deep thematic exploration, this portion of King Kong 2005 further strengthens the film's reputation as one of the most emotionally resonant and artistically ambitious blockbusters ever made, bringing viewers to the threshold of a conclusion whose tragic impact continues to resonate long after the final scene ends. King Kong 2005 enters one of its most emotionally devastating and thematically rich stages because the narrative has now fully revealed the tragic reality at the heart of the story, and one of the most remarkable achievements of this portion of the film is the way Peter Jackson transforms what began as a grand adventure into a deeply moving examination of loss, misunderstanding, and the destructive consequences of humanity's desire to dominate what it cannot truly understand. By this point, the audience's emotional connection to Kong is so strong that every event involving him carries enormous weight. Viewers no longer see him as a creature defined by his size or strength. Instead, they see him as a lonely individual whose greatest vulnerability is not physical danger but emotional attachment. This shift in perspective is essential because it allows the film's tragedy to function on a deeply personal level. The audience understands Kong's feelings, recognizes his longing for companionship, and sympathizes with his struggle to exist in a world that consistently views him through the lens of fear, curiosity, or profit. The relationship between Kong and Ann Darrow remains the emotional core of the entire narrative because it represents the only genuine connection Kong experiences. Throughout the story, Ann has demonstrated a willingness to see beyond appearances and recognize Kong's emotional complexity. She understands that beneath his intimidating exterior exists a being capable of affection, loyalty, curiosity, and vulnerability. Naomi Watts continues delivering an outstanding performance that reinforces this understanding. Her portrayal of Anne remains compassionate and emotionally authentic, allowing viewers to believe completely in the bond between the two characters. Andy Serkis's performance remains equally extraordinary. Through motion capture and physical acting, he creates a character whose emotions are communicated with remarkable clarity. Kong's expressions reveal longing, confusion, protectiveness, affection, and sadness in ways that transcend language. This achievement remains one of the greatest examples of performance capture acting because the audience responds to Kong not as a technical creation but as a fully realized character. The emotional credibility of his performance is one of the primary reasons the film's later stages are so effective. The visual effects continue supporting the storytelling in extraordinary ways. What remains impressive is not simply the technical quality of the effects but the way they are integrated into the emotional narrative. Kong feels physically present in every scene, and his interactions with people and environments possess a realism that strengthens audience investment. Peter Jackson and his creative team consistently prioritize emotional truth over spectacle, ensuring that every technical achievement serves the story. This approach allows the audience to remain focused on Kong's experiences rather than the mechanics used to create them. Thematically, the film continues exploring the consequences of exploitation and the human tendency to confuse admiration with ownership. Throughout the narrative, characters repeatedly encounter things of immense beauty and significance, yet their response is often to capture, display, and control those things rather than simply appreciate them. Kong remains the ultimate expression of this theme. His uniqueness makes him fascinating, but it also makes him vulnerable to exploitation. The film suggests that humanity often struggles to accept that some things possess value independent of human desires. This idea gives the story a level of philosophical depth rarely found in large-scale adventure films. The tragedy emerges not because Kong is dangerous but because others refuse to see him as anything more than a spectacle. Carl Denham continues playing a crucial role in expressing these themes. Jack Black's performance remains compelling because Denham is driven by genuine passion and enthusiasm. He loves discovery and believes in the power of extraordinary experiences. However, his ambition consistently blinds him to ethical concerns. He sees wonders and immediately imagines how they can be shared, celebrated, and monetized. The problem is not that he appreciates remarkable things but that he struggles to respect their autonomy. Through Denham, the film explores how good intentions can produce devastating consequences when they are separated from empathy and restraint. His complexity prevents the story from becoming simplistic because viewers can understand his motivations even while recognizing the harm they create. Adrien Brody's Jack Driscoll continues serving as an important moral counterpoint. His actions consistently emphasize compassion, responsibility, and loyalty. He values people more than achievements and relationships more than recognition. The contrast between Driscoll and Denham remains central to the film's thematic structure because it highlights two fundamentally different responses to the extraordinary. One seeks understanding and connection, while the other seeks possession and control. This contrast gives the narrative emotional and philosophical richness. The cinematography remains exceptional throughout this stage. Peter Jackson continues balancing epic scale with intimate emotion. Sweeping images emphasize the grandeur of the world and the enormity of the forces involved, while close-up compositions focus on emotional details that deepen audience engagement. This visual strategy allows the film to function simultaneously as a massive spectacle and a deeply personal tragedy. The musical score continues enhancing every emotional moment. Whether communicating sorrow, wonder, tension, longing, or heartbreak, the music consistently strengthens the audience's connection to the story. Themes of loneliness, belonging, beauty, exploitation, ambition, compassion, and humanity's relationship with nature become even more pronounced as the narrative approaches its conclusion. Kong's isolation remains one of the most heartbreaking elements of the film because viewers fully understand that his greatest desire is acceptance rather than power. He does not seek conflict or domination. He seeks companionship and understanding. This realization transforms the story into a profound meditation on what happens when a being capable of deep emotional connection encounters a world unwilling to recognize that humanity. The pacing remains deliberate and carefully controlled because Peter Jackson wants every emotional revelation and thematic idea to resonate fully. Rather than rushing toward the ending, the film continues deepening audience investment so that every development carries maximum significance. By combining extraordinary performances, groundbreaking visual effects, immersive world building, emotional storytelling, ambitious action sequences, and profound thematic exploration, this portion of King Kong 2005 further demonstrates why the film remains one of the most ambitious and emotionally powerful adventure epics ever produced, preparing audiences for the unforgettable conclusion that ultimately cements its reputation as one of modern cinema's greatest tragic stories. King Kong 2005 continues moving toward its emotional climax with remarkable confidence because the narrative has now fully established the tragedy at the center of the story, and one of the most impressive aspects of this stage is the way Peter Jackson ensures that the audience's sympathies remain firmly aligned with Kong even as the scale of the conflict continues expanding. What makes this achievement extraordinary is that Kong is still, from an objective perspective, an enormous and dangerous creature capable of incredible destruction, yet viewers increasingly see him not as a threat but as a victim of circumstances beyond his control. The film carefully earns this perspective through patient storytelling, emotional development, and consistent characterization. By the time the story reaches this stage, the audience understands Kong's emotional reality more clearly than many of the human characters do. They recognize that his actions are motivated not by malice but by loneliness, fear, protectiveness, and a desperate desire to preserve the one meaningful connection he has found. This understanding transforms every major event into something more emotionally complex than a simple confrontation between humans and a giant creature. The relationship between Kong and Ann Darrow remains the emotional foundation of the entire film because it represents a rare moment of genuine understanding between two beings who exist in completely different worlds. What makes their bond so compelling is that it develops without relying on conventional storytelling devices. There are no long conversations, no dramatic declarations, and no artificial attempts to force emotional intimacy. Instead, their connection grows through observation, trust, shared experiences, and mutual recognition. Anne sees Kong as an individual rather than a monster, and Kong responds to that compassion with a level of trust he has never shown anyone else. Naomi Watts continues delivering a performance filled with emotional sincerity. Every interaction she has with Kong feels authentic because she approaches the character as though he were a real living being rather than a digital creation. Andy Serkis's performance remains equally extraordinary. Through subtle body language and expressive movement, he communicates emotions that audiences immediately understand. Kong's vulnerability becomes increasingly apparent because viewers recognize how much he depends upon the connection he has formed with Anne. This emotional dependence makes the story increasingly heartbreaking because the audience understands how fragile that connection truly is. The visual effects continue serving the emotional narrative rather than distracting from it. Even during the film's largest and most spectacular moments, Kong remains a character first and a visual effect second. This distinction is essential because it allows viewers to maintain emotional engagement regardless of how large the action becomes. Peter Jackson's team consistently prioritizes performance and storytelling, ensuring that every technical achievement supports the narrative rather than overwhelming it. The result is a character who feels genuinely alive. Kong's reactions, movements, and expressions all contribute to a sense of emotional authenticity that remains impressive even decades after the film's release. Thematically, the film continues exploring humanity's tendency to exploit what it admires. Throughout the story, characters repeatedly encounter things that inspire wonder and fascination, yet their instinct is often to possess those things rather than simply appreciate them. Kong's situation remains the clearest expression of this theme. His uniqueness makes him valuable in the eyes of others, but that value ultimately places him in danger. The film suggests that admiration can become destructive when it is connected to ownership and control. This idea gives the narrative lasting relevance because it applies to far more than the specific events depicted on screen. It raises broader questions about humanity's relationship with nature, wildlife, and anything that exists beyond ordinary understanding. Carl Denham continues embodying many of these ideas. Jack Black's performance remains fascinating because Denham is motivated by genuine passion rather than cruelty. He loves discovery, storytelling, and spectacle. He wants to share extraordinary experiences with the world. However, his ambition repeatedly prevents him from recognizing the ethical consequences of his actions. He sees something remarkable and immediately imagines how it can be displayed, celebrated, and monetized. This inability to respect boundaries creates much of the tragedy at the center of the story. Denham remains compelling because the audience can understand his motivations even while disagreeing with his decisions. The film avoids simple moral judgments, instead presenting a character whose greatest strengths become sources of destruction when they are not balanced by empathy and restraint. Adrien Brody's Jack Driscoll continues serving as an important contrast to Denham. His priorities remain centered on people rather than achievements, and his actions consistently emphasize compassion, responsibility, and loyalty. The contrast between these two characters reinforces one of the film's central questions: should the extraordinary be possessed or understood? Through Driscoll, the story argues for empathy and connection. Through Denham, it explores the consequences of ambition unchecked by moral consideration. The cinematography remains exceptional throughout this stage. Peter Jackson and his collaborators continue balancing epic scale with emotional intimacy. Large-scale compositions emphasize the grandeur of the world and the immense forces shaping the characters' lives, while close-up shots capture subtle emotional reactions that deepen audience engagement. This visual balance allows the film to function simultaneously as a spectacular adventure and a deeply personal tragedy. The musical score remains equally effective. Whether expressing wonder, sorrow, tension, or longing, the music consistently amplifies the emotional impact of every scene. Themes of loneliness, belonging, beauty, exploitation, ambition, compassion, and humanity's relationship with nature continue becoming more prominent. Kong's isolation remains one of the film's most powerful emotional elements because viewers fully understand that his greatest desire is acceptance. He does not seek domination, conquest, or destruction. He seeks companionship. This realization transforms the narrative into a heartbreaking examination of what happens when a being capable of profound emotion encounters a world unwilling to recognize that humanity. The pacing continues, allowing these ideas to develop naturally, ensuring that every emotional beat carries maximum significance. By combining extraordinary performances, groundbreaking visual effects, immersive world building, emotional storytelling, ambitious action sequences, and profound thematic depth, this portion of King Kong 2005 further reinforces its status as one of the most ambitious and emotionally resonant adventure epics ever created, guiding audiences ever closer to a conclusion whose tragic power has ensured the film's lasting place in cinematic history. King Kong continues deepening its emotional and thematic resonance because the narrative has reached a stage where every major idea introduced earlier in the story begins revealing its full significance, and one of the most remarkable achievements of the film is the way it maintains emotional sincerity while operating on an enormous cinematic scale. By this point, the audience understands that the story is not fundamentally about monsters, adventure, or spectacle. Instead, it is about the consequences of isolation, the search for connection, and the tragedy that occurs when empathy fails to overcome fear and ambition. Kong remains the central embodiment of these themes because his experiences illustrate the gap between how individuals understand themselves and how the world chooses to define them. Throughout the narrative, he has been viewed as a monster, a wonder, a prize, a threat, and a legend, yet the audience understands that none of these labels fully capture who he really is. This disconnect creates much of the emotional power that drives the film. Viewers have spent enough time with Kong to recognize his emotional depth, and that knowledge transforms every event into something more meaningful than a simple conflict. Andy Serkis continues delivering one of the most extraordinary performances ever achieved through motion capture technology. The brilliance of the performance lies not merely in technical innovation but in emotional clarity. Kong's reactions consistently reveal a complex inner life. His moments of curiosity, affection, frustration, determination, and sadness feel authentic because they are rooted in recognizable emotions. As a result, audiences respond to him as they would any other major dramatic character. This achievement remains one of the defining strengths of the film because it allows the story to function as a genuine tragedy rather than merely an action spectacle. Naomi Watts continues playing an equally important role through her portrayal of Anne Darrow. Her relationship with Kong remains one of the most emotionally compelling aspects of the narrative because it is based entirely upon mutual understanding. Anne sees beyond Kong's intimidating appearance and recognizes his individuality, while Kong responds to her compassion with trust and loyalty. Their connection demonstrates one of the film's central ideas: meaningful relationships are built through empathy rather than similarity. Despite belonging to completely different worlds, they find a level of understanding that many human characters fail to achieve with one another. This emotional truth gives their bond extraordinary significance and helps explain why audiences remain invested in it throughout the story. The visual effects continue serving the narrative with remarkable effectiveness. Even during scenes of enormous scale, the film never loses sight of character. Kong remains expressive, believable, and emotionally engaging because every technical element supports storytelling. The environments, creature animation, lighting, and cinematography all work together to create a world that feels tangible and immersive. What makes these effects particularly impressive is that they rarely call attention to themselves. Instead, they function as tools that help audiences connect emotionally with the characters and events being depicted. Thematically, the film continues examining the relationship between admiration and exploitation. Throughout the narrative, people repeatedly encounter things that inspire awe and fascination, yet their instinct is often to control or possess those things rather than simply appreciate them. Kong remains the ultimate expression of this theme because his uniqueness makes him both admired and endangered. The film suggests that humanity often struggles to separate appreciation from ownership, and that failure produces devastating consequences. This idea gives the story enduring relevance because it extends beyond the specific events of the plot and invites reflection on broader questions regarding nature, power, responsibility, and respect. Carl Denham remains central to this exploration. Jack Black's performance continues balancing charisma and obsession in a way that keeps the character fascinating. Denham genuinely loves discovery and storytelling. He is captivated by the extraordinary and wants to share it with the world. However, his ambition repeatedly prevents him from recognizing ethical boundaries. He sees wonders as opportunities rather than independent realities deserving protection. This flaw makes him one of the film's most complex figures because his actions emerge from qualities that are both admirable and dangerous. Through Denham, the story explores how passion can become destructive when it is not balanced by empathy and restraint. Adrien Brody's Jack Driscoll continues serving as an important counterpoint. His actions consistently emphasize compassion, loyalty, and responsibility. Through Driscoll, the narrative argues that understanding and connection are ultimately more valuable than recognition and achievement. The contrast between these characters remains one of the film's strongest thematic elements because it presents two very different ways of responding to the extraordinary. The cinematography continues elevating the material through its ability to balance epic grandeur with intimate emotion. Vast landscapes emphasize the scale of the world and the significance of the journey, while close-up compositions reveal emotional nuances that deepen audience engagement. This combination allows the film to function simultaneously as a massive adventure epic and a deeply personal drama. The musical score remains equally important, consistently enhancing the emotional impact of every scene through themes that communicate wonder, sorrow, longing, tension, and heartbreak. Themes of loneliness, belonging, beauty, ambition, exploitation, compassion, and humanity's relationship with nature continue reaching greater levels of emotional significance. Kong's longing for acceptance remains especially powerful because it is rooted in a universal desire. Beneath his extraordinary appearance lies a need shared by all living beings, the desire to be understood and valued. This realization gives the story much of its emotional force and helps explain why audiences continue connecting with the character decades after the film's release. As the narrative moves steadily toward its final resolution, the emotional stakes continue growing because viewers understand that the themes explored throughout the story are approaching their ultimate expression. Peter Jackson carefully ensures that every scene contributes to this momentum, creating a sense of inevitability that strengthens rather than weakens audience investment. By combining exceptional performances, groundbreaking visual effects, immersive world building, emotional storytelling, thematic sophistication, and breathtaking cinematic ambition, this portion of King Kong 2005 further confirms its status as one of the most emotionally powerful and artistically ambitious adventure films ever made, continuing its exploration of humanity, empathy, loss, and wonder with extraordinary effectiveness. King Kong continues demonstrating why it remains one of the most emotionally ambitious blockbusters ever produced, because the narrative has now reached a stage where the audience's attachment to the characters becomes more important than the spectacle itself, and one of the most impressive qualities of the film is the way Peter Jackson steadily transforms a story that could have relied entirely on visual grandeur into a deeply affecting examination of empathy, identity, and the consequences of misunderstanding. By this point, viewers have spent so much time experiencing events through Kong's emotional perspective that the traditional distinction between human and monster has largely disappeared. The audience understands his motivations, recognizes his emotional needs, and sympathizes with his struggles in a way that many of the human characters never do. This shift in perspective remains one of the film's greatest accomplishments because it challenges assumptions established at the beginning of the story. Kong initially appears as a terrifying force of nature, yet the narrative gradually reveals him to be one of its most compassionate and emotionally vulnerable figures. The result is a story that encourages viewers to look beyond appearances and consider the emotional realities that exist beneath outward differences. Andy Serkis's performance remains central to this achievement. Through movement, posture, facial expression, and physical behavior, he creates a character who feels remarkably alive. Kong's emotions are never abstract or difficult to interpret. His loneliness, affection, frustration, determination, curiosity, and sadness are communicated with extraordinary clarity, allowing audiences to connect with him on a deeply personal level. What makes the performance especially impressive is that it never depends on dialogue. Every emotional revelation emerges from behavior rather than words, proving that character can be conveyed through physical expression alone when handled with sufficient skill and sensitivity. Naomi Watts continues providing an equally important contribution through her portrayal of Ann Darrow. Her relationship with Kong remains one of the film's strongest emotional elements because it is built entirely upon understanding and trust. Anne recognizes Kong's humanity long before most other characters are willing to do so, and her willingness to treat him as an individual rather than a spectacle reinforces many of the story's central themes. Their connection remains moving because it is rooted in empathy. Neither seeks power over the other. Instead, both find a sense of companionship that transcends the enormous differences separating them. This emotional honesty gives their relationship a timeless quality that continues resonating with audiences years after the film's release. The visual effects remain extraordinary not merely because of their technical sophistication but because of the way they support storytelling. Peter Jackson's creative team consistently prioritizes emotion over spectacle, ensuring that every digital achievement serves the narrative. Kong never feels like a collection of computer-generated images. He feels like a living presence whose experiences matter. This commitment to emotional authenticity allows viewers to remain invested in the story regardless of how large or spectacular the action becomes. Thematically, the film continues exploring humanity's complicated relationship with the unknown. Throughout the narrative, characters repeatedly encounter things that inspire awe and fascination, yet their response is often to control, classify, or possess those things rather than simply appreciate them. Kong remains the ultimate symbol of this conflict. His uniqueness attracts admiration, but that same uniqueness also exposes him to exploitation. The film suggests that people often struggle to respect what they cannot fully understand, and this failure creates many of the tragedies depicted throughout the story. This theme remains especially powerful because it extends beyond the specific circumstances of the plot and speaks to broader questions about human behavior, curiosity, and responsibility. Carl Denham continues representing one side of this thematic conflict. Jack Black's performance remains fascinating because Denham is driven by genuine enthusiasm and belief in the value of discovery. He loves extraordinary experiences and wants to share them with others. However, his ambition repeatedly prevents him from recognizing ethical boundaries. He sees remarkable things and immediately imagines how they can be displayed, celebrated, and transformed into success. This inability to separate appreciation from ownership continues driving much of the narrative's emotional tension. Denham remains compelling because he is not motivated by cruelty. Instead, he is blinded by passion and ambition, making him a far more realistic and interesting character than a simple antagonist would have been. Adrien Brody's Jack Driscoll continues providing an important contrast through his emphasis on compassion, loyalty, and human connection. His actions consistently reinforce the idea that understanding is more valuable than possession and that relationships matter more than recognition. The contrast between Driscoll and Denham remains one of the film's strongest thematic devices because it presents two fundamentally different ways of responding to the extraordinary. One seeks connection while the other seeks control. The cinematography continues enhancing every aspect of the narrative through its ability to balance epic scale and emotional intimacy. Sweeping images emphasize the grandeur of the world and the significance of the events unfolding within it, while close-up shots reveal subtle emotional details that deepen audience engagement. This visual balance allows the film to maintain both its blockbuster spectacle and its emotional depth. The musical score remains equally effective, consistently strengthening the impact of every major scene through themes that communicate wonder, longing, sorrow, tension, and hope. Themes of loneliness, belonging, beauty, ambition, exploitation, compassion, and humanity's relationship with nature continue becoming increasingly significant as the story progresses. Kong's desire for acceptance remains particularly moving because it reflects a universal human need. Despite his extraordinary appearance and circumstances, his deepest motivation is simple: he wants to be understood. This emotional truth continues giving the narrative its power and explains why audiences remain so invested in his journey. As the film moves closer to its ultimate resolution, every scene feels increasingly important because viewers understand that the emotional and thematic ideas explored throughout the story are approaching their final expression. Through its combination of extraordinary performances, groundbreaking visual effects, immersive world building, sophisticated themes, emotional storytelling, and breathtaking cinematic scale, this stage of King Kong 2005 further reinforces its reputation as one of the most memorable and emotionally resonant adventure epics ever created, continuing to explore the complexities of empathy, ambition, loss, and understanding with remarkable depth and sincerity.